Welcome to the Brave and Unbroken Project. Today we're going to be discussing the pandemic response and specifically anti-Asian racism in COVID-19 times. Racism is prominent across our world and our country all the time, but particularly even worse now with COVID. Please join us in learning more about this important topic. Good morning, this is Penny with Brave and Unbroken. And we are here to talk about anti-Asian racism and COVID-19 during the pandemic. And I have some special guests with me, and I'd like to have them each introduce themselves, and then we're going to dive into this very, very important topic. Faye, we'll start with you.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Faye Sripranaratanakul. I am Filipino-American, and I'm a mother of soon-to-be two. And I'm just passionate about giving a voice to the API community and building community. And I've also worked on what I'm passionate about is I love to write and I love to work on documentaries. I've worked on documentaries such as The Diaries of High Point, and I started a documentary series at the port called Walking Books, which showcases immigrant stories. And yeah, so just popcorn. Tiffany.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Sevilla. Like Faye, I work at the port. I am relatively new to the Seattle community, but in trying to learn more about where I'm living now and to connect to the community, I've found myself in the midst of this pandemic, trying to support communities of color, especially with regards to public health and environmental justice, which are very important to me and my work as a young professional. That mate?
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Samit Mel. I am a Khmer American. Was here since I was 3 years old in Seattle, and that was 1985. So I'm kind of dating myself, but that is kind of like a precursor to my experiences as a refugee that landed here. And I grew up in High Point, so it was interesting to hear Faye say that she has been working on a documentary in High Point, because so much has changed and just the social dynamic has changed there too. Currently, I'm just organizing within different capacities, and right now I'm helping to stand up Partners in Change, which is a statewide coalition and multi-county coalition across the state of Washington under the Equity in Education Coalition. And it's been really good, so I'm glad to be here to talk with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Meet. So this topic has been very important. Faye and I worked together, and I was really struck by some things that we had talked about, and I really wanted to bring this together to educate those who are like me, who are white and privileged and do not understand the racial inequities that are happening based on COVID or during a pandemic time. They're bad enough as it is without pandemics, and now we have a pandemic, and it's a whole different ball game. And so I was hoping that maybe Samit, you could start with us and help us understand some of the implications that the Asian American communities and other communities of color are experiencing right now during COVID.
Sure, yeah. Like I've always told other folks, it was the end of February that really spurred the activism organizing that I kind of led into what we're now, experiencing around the alliance and the partnership. Before February 25th, I was just walking my dog, waking up late. I just love my lifestyle, just chilling out and doing projects here and there. I was living like the island life. And then this shit hit, and, a friend of mine connected me and was just like, hey, did you hear about the quarantine site that's going to be slated to go in White Center? And I was like, what? Why are they putting a quarantine site in White Center? Like, the county is doing that. And it's like, did they not use the race and social, equity analysis toolkit or whatnot around that issue? Because White Center is predominantly a lot of communities of color that live there, immigrant or refugee communities. And, just the, it's just not a good space to put something like that in without the race and equity social justice toolkit. And I for like 3 days, I was like, okay, what's going on? And folks are wondering, like, what do we do next? And I was like, okay, we should just call a meeting. So I connected CIRC, which is the Coalition of Immigrant Refugees and Communities of Color, El Comite, a White Center Community Development Association, and then we called them a meeting that weekend with elected officials and with community members, and then decided to have another meeting the following Monday in person before we were basically under quarantine. And that pretty much sparked the conversation, and then the White Center folks started to organize, and we organized against the quarantine site that particular Tuesday. I think it's the first week of March, during council meeting, and also working to make sure that we increase, because the county had only wanted to put $150,000 into the executive's budget for community outreach, and we didn't think that was enough. So we advocated, and I think it was Germay and McDermott that helped to increase it to $1 million, which was available to the county as through the Office of Equity and Social Justice. And that came because there was a lot of pressure from the organizers and the community. And then I realized that that body of work is there, and then we needed to connect regionally. So, we still had CIRC folks at that space in El Comite, but I wanted to branch out and connect to the county. So I brought together 17 organizations our first few days, and then formed the alliance. And it was all like POC led, immigrant refugee led, and very smaller organizations that doesn't necessarily have access to those tables. So we brought them together. We really had a lot of like fuel and fire around how do we really demand social justice and demand equity from the county and the state. So they were able to really do a lot actually in those very small periods of time, and it grew in 2 weeks to 25 plus organizations, up to 114 members. And we had 5 committees, which is anti-hate and bias, which addresses the Asian hate issues and hate incidents. We also have the inclusive communities, which focuses on supporting undocumented communities, advocacy committee, communications, as well as immediate needs. So, and within like 3 weeks, we had a lot on our plate, but we were able to push a lot of items as well. We had a standing governors meeting every Tuesday at 3 o'clock to work with the governor's office. We worked with the King County Office of Equity and Social Justice to help support around the hate and bias reporting, and then also connecting with the Attorney General's office to have a statewide work on hate and bias reporting. Yeah, so it really grew. And then now I'm helping to stand the Partners in Change program, which is under the Equity and Education Coalition. And it's a statewide coalition, multi-county, focusing on 5 of those bucket areas as well, but really bringing people who never really necessarily had that access to come together. Like right now, I believe we have Wyson as a part of our coalition membership as well, and One America, and folks from Spokane and Pierce County and Snohomish County, from more than 24 or so zip codes, representing a very multifaceted, POC-led experience and organizing. Our biggest thing is to make sure that we support around resources, because we don't see the resources flowing down to communities of color, especially with the Paycheck Protection Program that from the federal government. That money hasn't really gone down to the smaller businesses. And if you can imagine like how many of the immigrant refugee businesses are receiving that, JC, one of the CTAC council members, has been working with business owners that don't have access to the PPP program from the first phase, because there was no language access of ability to be able to access the application. So the federal government really failed on that particular piece. And it has exacerbated all the economic disparities and racial disparities that you have all known and seen. So there's a huge portion of it. And, we're not doing this in silos, because we're also involved with the Pandemic Advisory Group at the county level, and the Immigrant and Refugee Advisory Group at the county as well. But also wanted to point out that, access to testing is really a huge need. We need access to testing. We need to prioritize communities that are hit the hardest, because we have seen some of the preliminary data that came down from the county and the Department of Health. And, we've heard it from other areas across the nation that Black, African American, Latinx communities are hit hardest in terms of death of COVID-19. So it makes sense, right, to like prioritize testing in those communities because they're hit the hardest. But it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone because we know that's always been the deal. And we just need to make sure that we shift those systems of structural racism. And the PPEs, they're not necessarily readily available to everyone as well. So right now you see the city of Seattle offering 50,000 non-medical masks to communities across the Seattle region. And the county is also doing the same as well as we're speaking right now. So they've reached out to Partners in Change, and we were able to distribute 4,000 non-medical masks to communities in South King County. And really wanting to go back to the particular issue about the reporting system, we worked with Chris Larson. Chris Larson has developed a reporting system. It's stopthehate.community. It is community-owned reporting system. It is anonymous, so people can go on there and report hate incidents and hate crimes. Or if you're a bystander, a concerned citizen, and you saw something happen, and that particular victim or individual doesn't want to report it, you can also report it because it is anonymous. It has real live heat mapping and GIS system. So you can basically see where the hot spots are at on the map. So that helps to provide like some analysis on the safety issues, also on, where people are being targeted at specifically. And I think one last thing I want to talk about is also just, in terms of this work is all about partnerships and all about building partnership base and how we can work across a sector and really just just unity all around that. And the biggest thing around policy for me around anti-hate and bias is I think that the government and business chambers need to put more pressure on establishments like Target, Home Depot, and areas that, Walmart, areas that communities of color have been experiencing hate crimes and hate incidents. They need to be very accountable, because when I had my experience at Target in Renton, and I was literally talking to the manager for like 20 minutes, and they just said that I would need to call the police and tell them. And I'm like, wait, that doesn't make any sense, because like, what if some people can't call the police and they don't feel comfortable calling the police? And I was like, you all need to put some type of signage at your establishment stating that you do not condone this type of hate incidents or hate crimes. And that is not, it hasn't been happening. And I think the Chamber of Commerce and businesses need to be held accountable for this particular behavior, because they're complicit to a system that pretty much creates downstream inequities and also hate crimes and incidents, and in most parts death to people. And we've seen that in the news, and that's not okay. And we need to put pressure on that. Not okay at all. I'll stop there because I want to make sure that I check myself for my time. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're good.
We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Tiffany, would
I
you
actually, sorry.
go ahead, Faye, you want to jump in? Either one.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, thank you for sharing your story about Target. Just recently, last week, my brothers went fishing. They're my younger brothers. One's 27, one's 23, and they love to fish. And they went in I think it was somewhere in a body of water close to Medina, at a popular park. It's escaped my the name of the park's escaped my brain. But anyways, they were fishing and they called me because they felt singled out by a cop that like questioned them, and they were just fishing. And this happened, I want to say about about a week ago. And for me, I wasn't there, but for me, resources like this, Stop the Hate, where they can report hate incidents, because they don't know how to defend themselves right now, or how do you even speak up against a cop saying, hey, are you singling us out? We need to keep government workers or the police accountable for actions like this. you know, it's important. It's so important right now, because this really shouldn't be happening. They were fishing while being people of color. So thank you for sharing that, and I like that you've started this movement of Stop the Hate.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks to both of you for sharing your stories. Tiffany, would you like to jump in?
Sure. I think that just to dial back, you know, I'd like to provide the audience some context for the history of violence against the Asian community in this country. A lot of folks don't learn in schools that it was all the way back in the 16th century that, you know, some of the first people who aren't indigenous to this land were Filipinos on a Spanish ship, who were, you know, in, I think, I don't know, the New Orleans area or something. These were the first, I mean, before Plymouth Rock and everything, there were Filipinos in this land. And, you know, you see this pattern of xenophobia against Asians. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 19th century, which is, I believe, the only, you know, law we've ever had in this country that specifically singled out one race as being like unacceptable to immigrate here, and that was to exclude Chinese laborers. That's not something that gets, I think, a lot of attention in history classes either. And so, you know, and there have been mobs that have ganged up on Asians in California historically. I mean, there's a lot of history against violence against Asians that doesn't get told, and so it results in this narrative of the model minority. This idea, this myth that things are fine for Asians. I mean, that first of all, that all Asians are the same. That when we talk about anti-Asian hate or anti-Asian racism, people, I think, sometimes just they picture someone from Japan or Korea, and you forget. And I think that this pandemic has really shined a light, at least in our community, on how that's completely false. That there are a lot of folks from Southeast Asia, from, you know, different refugee communities in this country who are suffering, and indeed even East Asians who are often portrayed as, you know, they're crazy rich and they've got it good and they all go to Harvard and become doctors. That's false. You have Asian business owners in the Chinatown International District who are suffering from targeted attacks against their businesses. They were some of the first businesses who started to lose revenues as a result of folks perpetuating this idea that somehow, you know, there's a history behind this, right? The history of thinking that Chinese food is dirty, that somehow you need to, you know, we need like white people to clean up these recipes and make them healthier. This false notion that Chinese food is dirty it made it very easy, I think, for folks to stop going to Chinese restaurants at the beginning of this pandemic, when it was, you know, first connected to the Wuhan region in China. And so I think that, you know, it's not like any of this was caused by the pandemic. I think that what you're seeing happening is the result of centuries of denying that, you know, Asians are a perpetual foreigner in this country. That even folks who, you know, they and their grandparents and their grandparents' grandparents might have been here in the US, might have fought for the US in World War II. These folks are still, you know, excluded from media and from the popular narrative. And so it makes it very easy, as with any kind of foreigner in this country, to just cast the Asian community aside and to exclude them and say, oh, it's like a safety concern now. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of history behind what's going on, that folks, honestly, you have to start there, because if you don't acknowledge that, you know, Asians are part of this country and that that xenophobia is wrong, then you can't even begin to, ask for aid efforts to help the Asian community because folks just don't think of the Asian community as being part of this country.
Thank you for that, Tiffany. I appreciate that. So thinking about the efforts, I know Faye and Tiffany, you are both ERG, Employee Resource Group leads at the Port of Seattle. What are some of the things that you're doing with the ERG to raise awareness in an organization like the Port?
Well, we have, I want to say we have brown bags, which is, we did just host one. When was that, Tiffany? It was, oh my gosh, was it in January?
The week before? Oh yeah, that one, yeah.
Yeah.
A different
The
one.
model minority event.
Oh, yeah.
So we take, we have these brown bags, and brown bags are a time to, I guess, learn what's that about? This, So we try to put a light to what issues are surfacing with the Asian American community. We also have, so we started off as a member, like a group of 4, which I think has now tripled because of the work we've done. We also host a luncheon, which celebrates different ethnicities within the Asian community, API community. And we have speakers like David Leong, who is he leads a lion dance group, which is, I think, really popular in the international district. We also showcased Pacific Islanders, our first luncheon, and we had, he calls himself Whitey Chen, but he shared stories of what it meant to have the tattoos that they have, that this isn't just a tattoo, it tells a story.
Yeah.
Some of them are pain stories or stories that of life, of adversity, and that that's what we do. We want to educate people and put a voice to the API community, not just in the Port, but that's to everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks for that.
Right. We've supported the Asian Counseling and Referral Service, ACRS Walk for Rice. And on top of just, educating folks who are not part of the API community at the Port, we're also really working on holding a space for people within that community to vocalize their experiences at the Port. We've had really honest conversations as a group about, how do we feel safe showing up as our whole selves at work, and what's important to us as a community. So, because I think, some of the work Faye has done in terms of just documenting the stories of Asian and Pacific Islander employees at the Port, that has a huge impact just on people's mental well-being, and validation. Being seen and being heard is really important to dignify people. And I think without, that kind of confidence and that kind of community building, it's difficult to even begin the work that Samate's talking about with building partnerships and, holding larger institutions accountable. It's really important just to even connect people in that way first.
Yeah, most definitely. I think relationships and connection are the kind of the basis roots of all efforts, it seems as though.
Right.
Samit, you'd mentioned the Race and Social Justice Toolkit. I'm sure, and I had just heard about it about a month ago, I think, when we talked about it on a webinar at the Port of Seattle. But could you share with those who don't know what that is and what the use of it is, so that they could also be aware?
Yeah, that toolkit is used to make sure that organizations or departments, have something to work off of in terms of evaluating where they're at on that spectrum of equity and social justice, so that to make sure that they have some type of toolkits to look at and evaluate themselves, but making sure that they don't create those downstream inequities, that that they're not making decisions without having the input of people who are impacted, and not having folks that are literally, you know, that's supposed to be leading it because they're from those communities to be there. And I think it's really the vision, you know, I think the vision in totality is equity, right? And it's going to be ongoing. Right now, COVID-19 is just exacerbating all the inequities that we've been experiencing, you know, through all these stories that we're hearing right now. And it's really unfortunate. You know, I'm glad the port has the, what was it, the EGR program there, or ERG, sorry, EGR. What was I thinking?
It's all good.
But I'm glad y'all got that there to hold space, like what Tiffany was talking about, because that is a part of equity, to make sure that we hold our space, and you know, this is our stories, these are our stories, and this is what's happening. You know, I'm also really thinking about how, again, going back to how can folks really help to contribute to this work that's being done, specifically because it's such a large body of need. And what does that really look like? You know, the port is a large institution, and you know, the state is an even larger institution. And then you have all these other micro organizations that are working to support one another and support their communities with nothing, right? Like nothing. I mean, $1 million is a drop in the bucket, you know, based on what other departments are receiving. You know, $300,000 is nothing. $500,000 from the state for language access is nothing. And that's to be divided and divvied up by how many smaller organizations of color?
Yeah.
So, you know, we're being played at the same time we're trying to make sure that we shift the narrative. But it all comes down to this really, you know, this thing that All In for Washington, led by Boca Negra, is the All In for Washington is working on tax reform, right? And we've done that work with them for the last 2 years, and I helped to make sure that 357 people in ethnic communities have access to that information and learn about the upside down tax code that we have here in the state of Washington. We have the most regressive tax code in the nation. I mean, that should be shocking to everyone who lives in the state of Washington. We want to talk about taking back and extrapolating those resources for our communities. We have to really make sure that our state legislatures work on tax reform to make sure that we have fully funded Seattle public schools, period, and fully funded resources and social services. You know, when Tiffany was talking about the history, I mean, the history of Southeast Asians immigrating to this region was what, from the 70s and 80s. You know, my family came here because of the genocide in Cambodia. The Vietnamese folks came here because of war there too. And so Laotian folks, Laos communities that came here are, you know, from war-torn spaces. And it's all a direct influence from Western imperialism and the United States military industrial complex, right? And so you have all of these devastating like movements of refugee crisis, and they came here in the 70s. We were getting some type of support then, but that support is not sufficient enough. And as you can tell, it's not, because it hasn't really lifted everyone up. And I think it's important to really highlight that historical set piece, because, you know, we didn't start out of nowhere in poverty. And I think spaces that, you know, you all are doing at the port are really important, especially if younger people have access to those stories so that they feel dignified. You know,
Exactly.
they don't have to feel like, oh my God, my family's poor. Like, no, I mean, it's not, your family's not poor because you're poor. It's because the systems have fucked you over, right? Like the system has been created in a way where like that's poverty has, you know, has been an outcome, and we need to continue to push for those spaces. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say it's systemic, right? So I always was wondering, and this is something I think, sorry, Tiffany, I'm a broken record, but the younger community or folks that are poor, you know, of the Asian community, like they have these the youth that are growing, and they don't know how to defend themselves or how to speak up. It's not because that it's because we don't have the tools. It's API history has not, you know, it's not even covered in regular school education until you get into college and you have to choose it as an elective. So how are we supposed to speak up or help, you know, or have the tools to be able to know, oh yeah, I am being mistreated, or, you know, this is another obstacle, I believe, that also needs to be addressed.
Right. And I think as we're talking about actions that, that we're taking, I think that there are also, actions that folks outside of the API community might consider. And I would start with, at the most basic level, I would start with curiosity. Go out and learn about these things. I mean, it's not like there are no books or you don't have the internet or access to movies that tell these stories. And then, the next step I would say is asking questions of your community, of institutions that you're part of or that you patronize. I'm like somebody was talking about, there have been folks who have been harassed at, big stores here in the area. There was an incident at Home Depot, and I think that if it's only people who are being targeted, asking, something like Home Depot or Target, hey, what's your policy, or how, do you welcome racists to shop here? Then there's not going to be a lot of movement behind that. But if you find that, a lot of the folks who, small businesses who frequent Home Depot or folks outside of the API community, if they are also asking those questions, then that really starts to put more pressure on these companies to respond and to be accountable for what's going on in their, in their stores. And then when folks do, when folks are safe or comfortable with contacting the police, the police need to have a protocol for, how to respond as a community organization to hate crimes. And unfortunately, we know that there have been incidents in this area where folks have called the police saying, hey, this happened to me. Someone, yelled these horrible slurs at me. And the police were, whoever answered the phone was unaware of what to do with this information. They said, well, there's, I can't arrest them for saying that stuff to you. But then, there's still things that they can do, right? That the police department can do as a community organization to show up for this part of their community that they're supposed to serve. And so it's important, again, that not just the victims are asking, hey, what are you doing about this? How would you respond? And, what are your policies? I think folks who are in positions of power, folks who have a voice, and especially folks who are documented, who aren't, afraid of interacting with government officials. It's not hard for you to just pick up the phone, call the non-emergency line, ask these questions of your community leaders.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Boy, there's just so much here. I think the impact is so significant. Faye, could you share about the international district and the one restaurant story?
Oh, yes. So I think, I saw it social media. Jade Garden was vandalized, and it was really heartbreaking for me to see that. It was the walls were because the walls were glass. They broke it down, spray painted over it, and this is a popular Chinese restaurant in the international district. And this happened during the COVID-19 height, or when I want to say it was it early February, early March,
I think.
yeah. Late February, early March. It just really tugged at my heartstrings. For a little bit, I was kind of in a bubble. The COVID-19 news just hit, so I was just like, oh my gosh. And then to see it directly impacting my community, it really struck a chord with me. But what's the beauty in it is that actually the community came together and fixed it. And now you'll see these murals of artwork where there used to be, where it was vandalized, where it was broken. But that's just, I feel like that's the resilience of the API community. we do have a strong sense of community, and we came together. But yeah, this happened not too long ago, and actually just more recent, Viet Hoa was broken into, and that's a Vietnamese restaurant, also in the International District. And so we need to keep up on these types of news, or these, because we need to come together and support these people. We need to help heal them, because it wasn't directed to me directly, but that's part of my community. These people look like me, you know. That's how that's why it struck a chord with me. But so we gotta keep up on the news outside of what we see in the popular media. You know, we gotta look for those stories. We gotta share those stories.
And that leads us into, I think the last part of that was significant. I think the stories of hope. I think there's a lot of people doing good work. And so maybe Tiffany, would you like to share a story of hope through all this? Like out of the rubble comes some glimmers of hope and dreams and love.
Sure. So one recent success story, our friend Stephanie with others in the, Hmong and Khmer communities were able to organize a sort of fundraiser type event called Solidarity Flowers. And this was, several days where folks could order online bouquets to pick up over Mother's Day weekend. And we know, Mother's Day weekend is it's a very significant time for flower farmers who have been impacted by this situation because they aren't really moving as much product at Pike Place Market or the local farmers markets. This is also a community that a lot of the families don't qualify for other forms of relief that have been made available. A lot of the families are not, able to take advantage of existing programs. So I think over this weekend, the Mother's Day weekend, $29,000 were raised to go directly to these flower farmers and these families, which was incredible. And it's the kind of thing that just grassroots efforts, have been able to produce. So.
And Samit, you mentioned it earlier, and thanks for that, Tiffany. I just love that story. 29,000 sounds like a lot, but to Samit's point, it's really like a drop in the bucket compared to, or maybe a drip really compared to what is needed.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about communities and how they're not seeing the benefits of, say, the relief effort from the federal government and those kinds of things, how they're excluded?
Yeah, I know one of our partners, the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, has been working with a whole bunch of other organizations across the state. They sent a letter including 430 organizations to sign on to ask for the governor to make sure that he puts out $100 million for relief aid to communities who have been left out from the relief aid, which are majority or all of them are undocumented communities. And also to make sure that the state stands up a permanent unemployment program for undocumented communities as well, because they have been left out from any of those resources and social service safety nets because of their status. And unfortunately, they've been basically contributing to the society, the economy, and the region since the get-go, right? They pay taxes, they pay B&O taxes, they pay sales taxes, they pay those different taxes here, but they're not receiving any of the safety nets. So that's going to be really important to help support, because those are folks that are hardest hit right now that do not receive any of these relief funding. And so if people want, I can send you the link for the Wyson link, but also I can connect you with Montserrat Padilla, who is the coordinator or the director of the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network, so that she can also convey some more information about that particular piece of work.
That would be great. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. So let's talk about privilege. So I'm a privileged white woman, and I have no experiences similar to any of these that we're talking about. And we talked a little bit about actions. I think, Tiffany, I appreciate that you jumped in. Curiosity, questions, police protocol, organizational protocol. What other things can the privileged white folks or other communities do to be allies and support and actually help versus just standing on the sidelines going, yeah, I know there's a problem? Like what kinds of things besides these, are there other things that we should have people be aware of that they can do?
You can help volunteer whenever there is an event that is helping to feed the community, particularly like what just came up is the Walk for Rice with ACRS. There are probably volunteer opportunities. I know that there are other folks that wanted to help support by going door to door in certain residential spaces that have a lot of like Southeast Asian Americans to give them information in language, particularly because PPEs are very hard to come by as well. So we can also make sure that we distribute that. But I think one of the biggest thing is to make sure that maybe there's a way that folks can help to fundraise and then contribute to the fundraising efforts that are relief efforts around the region, like COVID-19 mutual aid or MASN or that's the mutual aid's Puget Sound Solidarity Network, I believe. But I can connect folks with them as well. They're doing decarceration work. And, you know, really, I think it's funding and access to information is going to be so important in right now. And thinking about how, you know, white privileged people can also use their privilege to make sure that beyond COVID-19, what does that look like for us to address the issues of institutional racism and structural racism, you know, and being open to really having POC folks, Black, Indigenous, people of color folks to lead, and then having, you know, white folks really just help to support where there's needed. I think that's going to be really important as well.
Thank you. And I was thinking the same thing, is to make sure that this isn't just a COVID time topic, right? This is an issue before, it's a bigger issue now, it's going to be an issue after. And I think it's so very important. Faye?
Oh, I was going to say, well, and I'm just touching again on the experience my brothers had, because at that time they told me there's a lot, you know, though it was COVID-19 times, that's when they started opening up the parks a little bit.
Yeah.
They said that there was a lot of people there. How about if you see it, you act or you help? You know, if you see the injustice, you see the inequality there, speak up for someone that can't. So tune in and be present would be my, you know, just, I guess, open your eyes.
Tiffany?
You know, to Summit's point, just right, this started before the pandemic, and it is going to continue after the pandemic. And I think familiarizing yourself with the exploitation of immigrant labor, especially in this country, is really critical. I mean, you know, this rule about public charge, which basically reduces the ability of folks who use benefits like Medicaid or food stamps, reduces their ability to, you know, get a green card or visas. That's something that, you know, predated the pandemic and is going to, you know, probably come up again after the pandemic. And it's unjust, and it leaves a lot of people in the dark, folks who, like Samay was saying, are contributing to our economy and our society, you know, without whom we, you know, can't and wouldn't want to live. So I think just continuing, you know, to ask those questions, and like Faye said, to say something when you hear it. I mean, I found myself in a very uncomfortable position recently among coworkers of having to confront someone who made a very inappropriate joke about, you know, people in China eating bats. And I was surprised that, I mean, these folks that, you know me on this call didn't say anything. So it, you know, don't leave don't leave all the work to be done by the folks who are being targeted. You know, use your citizenship, use your dollars, support, you know, businesses that are owned by communities of color, and yeah, just continue asking questions. Don't accept the narrative that you were taught in school.
Thanks for that. Any last thoughts, or I've got chills. I appreciate you. Disappointed to hear that. We work at a pretty awesome place, so.
Yeah.
Final statements, thoughts that you'd like to share. Like, just go around the circle. Maybe Faye, do you want to start this time?
I think it's more. I think we just need to continue to just come together. Really, it's such a. And it isn't just now. We needed to do this like last year already. Like we need to come together. We need to learn about each other. We really just at this even more so to build community and understand one another. And I think by listening and with an open heart and an open mind, think we can accomplish a lot, and we can do a lot of the work that needs to be done that Sam mentioned. So we really just everyone, like, I'm sorry, it sounds like so hippie, but that's what I feel like. We just need to come together.
Tiffany?
I appreciate what you're doing here, Penny. I think giving the opportunity to have these stories be heard is really important. And, I would just hope that, I know it's exhausting. We're all very tired. We're all, strained by our own experiences with the pandemic, and with being, a lot of folks for whom home is not a great place to be stuck at right now. I know that there's a lot folks have going on. And so I would just hope that people are taking care of themselves, so that they can show up for one another when they're called to.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Cindy?
Thank you both for speaking about the topics you were speaking about. And thank you, Penny, for having us on just to share our perspectives and our experiences. I think there's 4 things that I would love to kind of like segue into more action items. Number 1 is, how do we make sure that we push out stopthehate.community? Because as it's going to go live with our full press release with the Attorney General's office, it will be statewide, and we're partnering with the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office connected us with 2 law schools in the state. But that particular set of work is community owned, and the data is community owned. We want to be able to make sure that we get work around that to push for legislation or policy change. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is, Faye, when you're talking about what your brothers experienced, a friend of ours also experienced similar thing in Snohomish County, but the cop was asking for their status, like what if they were, documented or undocumented. And the thing is, we need to perhaps have that conversation with the governor and the governor's office to see if they can do something about it, but also to push out statewide, like a proclamation on anti-hate and bias for the Asian American community. But that will be something I think we should definitely follow up on. And then really helping to support partners in change. Like, how can you all help to support these efforts that are already bringing people across the state? A lot of it is here in King County, but now we're building with 5 counties, and we want to make sure that the largest piece is advocating for statewide change, and then really getting our legislators to our elected officials, because you've seen a lot of elected officials on our calls, is to make sure that they change some of the systems on the local level as well, to make sure that it reflects what community needs. Like, how do we jointly support like fundraising efforts to support our most impacted communities? So I'm just thinking about those like 4 things and how we can move forward. So I know we might not have those answers now, how we can move forward, but I hope that in some ways we can have a debrief later, or if other people want to join the work.
That would be great. And I'd love to bring this community back together, the three of you and others, if there are, that would make sense, because I think we need people to engage. And so if we need to do this every week, all for years and years to come, we should do that, whatever it takes to help educate those. Faye?
Yeah, well, I don't know, it's time to thank Penny. So I just want to thank you for the platform, Penny. That really speaks on your heart, and I truly appreciate you as a person and your causes as well.
Thanks for that. Heart and love. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate it so much. We're going to get this out. We'll, to the community that's watching, wherever you are, we'll be sharing resources that these folks have shared with us, and also be creating a fundraiser and directing the funds to the best place possible. We have so many needs in this community, and we want to make sure that anybody that can, every little bit counts. So we want to do everything that we can. So thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Penny.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
Have a good Saturday.
You
as
too.
well.
Okay.